If you live in the United States, there are several important economic developments you should know about right now. Some of the latest numbers are encouraging, while others show that American households are still dealing with higher prices and economic uncertainty. So, what exactly is happening with the US economy? Are things finally getting better for ordinary Americans? And what could these latest developments mean for your wallet, your spending, your job, and the months ahead? In today's video, we'll break down the latest US economic update in simple terms, without complicated financial language. Let's get started. First, there is some encouraging news. According to the latest data from the US Bureau of Economic Analysis, the American economy expanded at an annual rate of 1.5% during the second quarter of 2026. That number is slower than the 2.1% growth recorded during the first quarter, so the economy has clearly lost some momentum. But there is an important detail here. American consumers are still spending. Consumer spending increased at a 3.4% annual rate during the second quarter. That matters because consumer spending is one of the biggest drivers of the US economy. When Americans continue buying groceries, clothing, cars, services, entertainment, technology, and other products, businesses continue to generate revenue. And that helps support economic activity across the country. So while growth has slowed, the economy has not simply stopped. There are still areas showing resilience. Another development worth watching is household income. Recent July data showed that Americans' disposable income increased by 0.5%, while real disposable income, after adjusting for inflation, increased by 0.4%. That was the third consecutive monthly increase in real disposable income. For everyday Americans, this is important. It means that, at least in the latest month of data, household purchasing power improved somewhat after accounting for rising prices. But there is a major catch. Prices are still rising. And that brings us to one of the biggest challenges facing American families right now. The latest inflation numbers show that the cost of living problem has not disappeared. The Personal Consumption Expenditures, or PCE, price index increased 3.7% over the year in July. Core inflation, which excludes food and energy prices, remained at 3.3%. That is significantly higher than the Federal Reserve's long-term inflation target of 2%. In practical terms, Americans may still feel pressure when paying for housing, utilities, transportation, services, and other everyday expenses. This is why economic headlines can sometimes feel confusing. You can have income going up while still feeling like your money isn't going as far as it used to. That's because what really matters to households isn't simply whether wages or income are increasing. It's whether income is increasing faster than prices. And right now, that remains a major issue. Now let's talk about something that could have a major impact on Americans: interest rates. The Federal Reserve is closely watching inflation. If inflation remains stubbornly high, policymakers may have less room to reduce interest rates. That matters because interest rates affect borrowing costs across the economy. Think about mortgages. Think about car loans. Think about credit cards. Think about business loans. When borrowing costs are high, households and businesses generally have to spend more money on interest. That's one reason millions of Americans are paying close attention to what happens next at the Federal Reserve. The Fed's decisions could influence everything from housing affordability to consumer borrowing and business investment. And investors are watching closely as Federal Reserve Chair Kevin Warsh prepares to speak at the Jackson Hole Symposium. His comments could provide important clues about how policymakers are thinking about inflation and future interest rate decisions. Now for another area of good news. Business investment remains an important source of economic strength, especially in technology and artificial intelligence. Recent economic data showed strong business investment outside of housing, with AI-related spending playing an important role. At the same time, the stock market has been responding positively to strong results from major technology companies. Artificial intelligence continues to attract enormous investment from businesses across the United States. That doesn't mean every American will immediately see more money in their bank account. But major investment in technology can create opportunities for businesses, workers, entrepreneurs, and investors over time. It can also increase productivity and potentially create new industries and new types of jobs. So the AI boom is becoming an increasingly important part of the American economic story. Despite some positive developments, consumers are becoming more cautious. Recent data showed that consumer confidence edged down slightly in August. That tells us something important. People may still be spending, but they are paying attention to their budgets. When prices remain elevated, households naturally become more careful about where their money goes. Some consumers may delay large purchases. Others may look for discounts. And some may increase their savings. In fact, the personal savings rate recently increased to around 3%. That may not sound like a huge number, but it shows that households are still trying to build some financial protection. So what happens from here? There are several major things Americans should keep an eye on. First, inflation. If inflation begins moving closer to the Federal Reserve's 2% target, that could provide policymakers with more flexibility. Second, employment. A strong labor market would help support household incomes and consumer spending. Third, interest rates. Lower borrowing costs could eventually provide relief for people looking to buy homes, refinance loans, or finance major purchases. And fourth, consumer spending. If Americans continue spending at a healthy pace, that could help keep the economy growing. But if consumers suddenly pull back because of high prices or financial concerns, economic growth could weaken. So, is this really good news for Americans? The honest answer is, there are reasons for optimism, but there are also reasons to remain cautious. The U.S. economy is still growing. Consumer spending remains an important source of strength. Real disposable income has increased for several consecutive months. Business investment, particularly in artificial intelligence and technology, remains strong. Inflation is still above the Federal Reserve's target. Interest rates remain an important concern. And many American households are still feeling the pressure of higher living costs. In other words, this is not a simple story of an economy that is either completely healthy or completely weak. It is a mixed picture. And that is exactly why the next few months could be so important. For everyday Americans, the most important thing is not simply what Wall Street is doing or what economists are predicting. It's what happens to your income, your expenses, your job, your mortgage, your savings, and your overall cost of living. The latest numbers show that there are genuine signs of economic resilience. But the fight against inflation is clearly not over. As more economic data arrives and the Federal Reserve makes its next decisions, we'll have a clearer picture of where the American economy is heading. So, if you want straightforward updates about major U.S. developments, make sure to stay connected with Island News Network. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and share this video with someone who wants to stay informed about what's happening across America. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next update.